Dear friends, dear students or postgraduate students, for me it's a great honor to be invited to CERIS, to the closing ceremony of your scholar year, and I suppose to address you with a closing address. And the title of this, it's not speech, it is not lecture. You had so many lectures during your hours spent in this school, but rather reflections and invitation to you to try to analyze where we are now in terms of security, in terms of strategy, in terms of future of security of Euro-Atlantic area and beyond that. And let me start with the second part of my presentation, challenge for security. And to do so, to analyze what kind of challenges we face now, I propose you to journey back to the history, to Yalta. Then we will return to Sochi, Winter Olympic Games, after which immediately events started. And then we will come back again to Ukraine, to Crimea, which is now occupied, and we will try to understand what's next on the security agenda, what's next on the agenda of Ukrainian people. So, 1945, it was a year when leaders of the USSR, United States, and Great Britain met in Yalta, in Crimea, to discuss and to decide the future of Europe and the future of security in the world. It was there when the decision to establish United Nations organizations was adopted in principle. And it was there where new framework of existence in the world had been started. Let me remind you also that 1945 was the year when well-known British novelist George Orwell published his famous book Animal Farm, and I will refer to it several times today because it's important. He was the first who introduced actually the term Cold War and many other things which proved to be actual even now, even these days. So after Yalta, we started to live in a bipolar world. Pax Americana have been established and Pax Sovietica. And this division through decades was the fundamental principle of coexistence of two systems which competed very strongly, and in many cases such a competition was too dangerous for the whole world and for particular countries. Let me remind for example, just few events on that quite a long list. Hungarian Revolution in 1956 and immediate reaction of the Soviet Union. Berlin Wall, which was erected over one night in August 1961. Caribbean crisis, 62, when the world was very close to the nuclear war. Then Prague Spring, 1968, when Soviet Union, together with other countries of the Warsaw Pact, moved armed forces on the territory of Czechoslovakia until the stabilization of political and economic situation. This is also important. Please take attention on that formula, until the stabilization of political and economic situation. In case of Czechoslovakia, it took 20 years until military presence of the Soviet Union ended up. Later, events in Poland, establishment of Solidarność, and a very strong move for democracy. And all this system started to disappear from our daily life and from the global politics in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell and when Germany reunited. Very shortly after that event, the Soviet Union stopped to exist. And in 1991, independent Ukraine was born, as well as other post-Soviet republics. And after that date, the global security order and the implications for that completely changed. And what we witnessed since 1991, it's the strong desire and utmost efforts aimed at building new security order which would be fair, which would be favorable for everybody, which would be inclusive and create good opportunities for development of all nations. And it was the case. It was a time of expectations, it was a time of romanticism, including in my country, because first days of the independence were, it really was a very emotional time in the history of my nation and my country, when we dreamed about future life in the free and democratic world. Since that time, many things have been changed. Russia started to act as an also independent state, the Russian Federation. Some of you may remember that the CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States, have been created, which is supposed to include all former Soviet republics, and this international organization continued to exist. But still, new realities that didn't fit to the philosophy of some politicians and leaders of some countries. And then again, let me remind you that among those efforts which followed events in '89 and '91 was the establishment of the OSCE. Yes, we started to work on the security and cooperation in Europe long before that date, in 1975, but de facto OSCE took its modern shape after 1992, when former Soviet republics also signed the final act and joined this organization as independent states. Now let me also, for you who studied, I call history of diplomatic relations, or some of you maybe still know the name Andrei Kozyrev. He was the first actually foreign minister of the Russian Federation, and he started to work with Yeltsin, at that time president of Russian Federation, within the Soviet Union. So why this name is important? Because he is famous, and his name is in the books on modern foreign relations and policy. He's known as the minister who, participating in the international conference in Stockholm, made a statement which was a big surprise for all those who attended this international conference. Let me quote, and it is, I will translate it from Russian, but you will get the main message. So he stated, I quote, territory of the former Soviet Union cannot be considered as a zone of full implementation of the OSCE principles. In fact, it's a space where Russia will continue to exercise its interests using all means, all possible means, including military and economic. We will firmly insist that all former republics of the USSR immediately join new federation or confederation, and we will talk hardly about that. It was a provocative statement of Kozyrev, but what seemed to be a provocation and exercise on the international conference unfortunately became true in 2014. It is important to understand also that the vision of the leadership of the Russian Federation based on the understanding that after 1991 it was a historical mistake and non-existence of the Soviet Union is one of the biggest tragedy for Mr. Putin, and President Putin several times referred to that fact publicly. What to do? What to do with that tragedy? To restore justice. What is justice in the understanding of Russian politicians? It means to force all those who would like to act independently, freely, without opinion of Moscow, and to build its future. It wasn't acceptable for Moscow. They continue to draw and to implement policy in terms of competition, including military competition. And NATO still an enemy for the Russian Federation, even having in mind all facts with the establishment of Partnership for Peace programs and the creation of the EAPC, the Russian Federation is a member. So the driving force is to continue to exercise its national policy, which is based on the spheres of influence. And for Russian leadership, definitely Ukraine is such a sphere of influence. And let me also get back to another historical fact, 2008. Let me remind you that it was President Putin was elected for the first time in the year 2000. So it took him 8 years to rebuild the Russian Federation, to feel people and country, Russia itself, stronger and able to start action. What kind of action started at that time? Georgian-Russian War in 2010, in August. What was the result of that event? The establishment of two quasi-states, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are not recognized except by the Russian Federation, which continue to be isolated, and people of which continue to suffer. It was a result why it became possible. Again, in my understanding, it is still a reality because the reaction of international community was not clear. When I think about this event and when I reflect about what's going on now, I don't know, you may not agree with me, but I find the definition for such an approach, I call it désolé politics. For all those who live in Brussels, désolé is a very familiar word, which is very useful in different situations. So this désolé approach led to the situation in 2014, when Russia started new aggression, this time against Ukraine, against my country. It was done shortly, a few days later, after Olympic Games had been closed in Sochi. It is clear that events have been prepared and planned in advance. As we see now, it took several years to prepare the whole operation, the whole thing, to train people, to implement people, especially in some particular areas of Ukraine. And then finally, it was the unprecedented decision of the upper chamber of the Russian parliament when they voted 100%, -1, the decision which allows President Putin to move armed forces on the territory of Ukraine. And again, the decision of Duma comprised the same formulation, until the stabilization of political and economic situation in Ukraine, on the whole territory of Ukraine. And this decision is still valid. It is open. Meanwhile, Russian army penetrated into Crimea illegally, because it was started even before this decision of State Duma in Russia. Then so-called referendum was organized, and then Crimea was annexed in the 21st century, despite all principles, all norms of international law, despite all bilateral and multilateral agreements. And it's a pity fact that this act of aggression was committed by the country which is a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, which is supposed to understand absolutely clearly what does it mean to be a member of the Security Council, and even more, to have a veto right. So since occupation of Crimea, Security Council, yesterday, if I'm not wrong, it was 15th meeting in 2 months, devoted to the situation in Ukraine. And in all cases, Russia was in full isolation, and all statements of Russian Ambassador Vitaly Churkin to the United Nations, if you follow all his speeches, this is repetition of the same messages and same passages. What is also important, that rhetorics of Moscow now accept as a fact a complete annexation of Crimea. No more discussions about Crimea and its future. For Moscow, the issue is settled, but not for Ukraine. For Ukraine, this territory is temporarily occupied, and it is also important to understand and to remember that United Nations voted a resolution in support of territorial integrity of Ukraine, and this resolution was supported by 100 member states. At the same time, in favor of Russian position against this resolution voted only 11 countries. So again, for me, I describe this circle referring to well-known movie, Putin and his friends. Friends of Putin, the same. And unfortunately, all strong reaction of international community didn't produce visible effect. What do we see now? We see that despite all discussion in the Security Council, despite the decision of the United Nations, despite the decisions of G7, and G7 suspended participation of the Russian Federation in this group of countries, despite the decision of the European Union to impose phase 1 and phase 2 of sanctions, despite the strong commitment of NATO to territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and suspension of all activities between Russia and NATO, despite all these facts, Russia continued to conduct provocative actions with secret agents involved on the territory of Ukraine. As a result, we see not only Crimea annexed, but also groups of separatists, heavily armed, supported from Moscow and from the territory of Russian Federation. And unfortunately, they continue to fight with Ukrainian forces, and every day brings more and more casualties, more and more killed Ukrainian soldiers or Ukrainian special servicemen, as well as people from civilian population, unfortunately. So the number of casualties growing every day. And we hope that more pressure from the international community and more steps would bring to the result. And what is the result for Ukraine? It's withdrawal of all Russian forces from the territory of Ukraine, including Crimea. And this is, you know what is the main idea? We know that we have many problems, but we know also that we can cope with those problems ourselves, and we see clearly the way out of the situation. So what do we need? We need peace and non-intervention from the third parties. We need support of international organizations. We need cooperation with international financial organizations. We need to be closer with the European Union. We need more support and more cooperation with NATO, and all these are being done, are being implemented. Because we are talking here about strategy, I cannot, again, to draw your attention to another very important fact and another very important international document which was just thrown away by Russia. I mean the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. For those who don't remember the history, I would like to remind that Ukraine joined Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1994 as non-nuclear state. Let me remind you again that after independence, Ukraine inherited third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And it was very difficult and very important decision of Ukraine, as well as of Kazakhstan, to renounce its nuclear weapons, to get back all nuclear warheads on the territory of Russia, and to join NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, as non-nuclear state. And to support that step of Ukraine, in 1994 in Budapest, the memorandum was signed. It was signed by the Russian Federation, the United States, the Great Britain, and Ukraine. It was about guarantees of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. And as we see, unfortunately, Russian guarantees means nothing. And unfortunately, all Ukrainian proposals to activate mechanisms provided by Budapest Memorandum failed, because United States and Great Britain were ready to talk, and we had series of meetings, but never with Russia. So it is also put aside. And let me remind you that this is very serious step and very serious document. And it was done just before, several days before nuclear summit, which took place in The Hague this year. So if we think about the situation, and if you think what is in game, what is in danger, two serious, very difficult problems and very crucial points for the global security, because nuclear deterrence and nuclear safety is one of the milestones in the foreign policy and security policy. Now it is questioned and it is challenged by the Russian Federation. What we see now is a continuation of isolation of the Russian Federation, including from Europe, United States, and Canada. Many countries imposed additional sanctions on bilateral level. At the same time, it means that Ukraine, and as well as other members of the international community, continue to propose Russia to get back to peaceful solutions, to diplomacy, to negotiations, not to people with guns and arms who continue to provoke civil population, who continue to increase tension in several regions of Ukraine, who continue to occupy Crimea, and several facts about today's Crimea. It was very sad news that in Crimea, in the city of Simferopol and Bakhchisarai is the capital of Crimean Tatars. Who are Crimean Tatars? For those who don't remember, let me remind you. It's people, it's a population, national minority in Ukraine, which is numbered as strong as 300,000 people now living in Crimea. 70 years ago, in 1994, in one night, it was 19th of May, Joseph Stalin put all Crimean Tatars in railway wagons and brought them to Siberia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other parts of big, at the time, Soviet Union. Why? Because Tatar people was punished because allegedly it cooperates with Germans, with occupants. All people, all nations. And it was one of the very important decisions of Ukraine, independent Ukraine, in 1992, to invite Crimean Tatars back to Crimea. And they returned. And they are as numerous as 300,000 now. So they were forbidden by new pro-Russian authorities in Crimea to celebrate the anniversary of deportation, to mark somehow this event. It was just forbidden. And leaders of Crimean Tatars were summoned to the prosecution's office and prevented from any other activities in that regard. So meetings and commemorations took place in Kiev, but not in Crimea. It's a terrible fact which is insult all these Tatar people, and this one of signs of new democracy in Crimea. It was also promised at the stage before referendum and immediately after that in Crimea. It was promised by local so-called authorities that Crimean Tatars will be invited to the government. Yes, they were. 2 representatives have been invited, and after long discussions among these people, they decided, yes, let them go, let's see how does it work. It was in April. Now they are fired. No game anymore, no tricks. This is a reality. Now it's Soviet time again. So I told you that after 1945 we existed in bipolar world with Pax Americana and Pax Sovietica. What I see now I cannot describe, but again with a new definition, Pax Russica, because all these occupations in Abkhazia, in Ukraine, have been committed under the pretext of the protection of Russian-speaking population. And let me again tell you that in Crimea there never were Russian-speaking minority. There always was majority, as well as in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. Majority of the population always spoke and continue to speak Russian. So no doubt that it's just a pretext, and from whom they supposed to protect Russian-speaking population in those territories. So what are features of Pax Russica? Again, it's ideology which unfortunately brings us, all of us, because you cannot live in the isolated world and you cannot close eyes on the existence of the Russian Federation. So we have to live with that. And this policy, Pax Russica, is directly intended to get back to the opposition and what Russia can oppose to the development of democracy, that instructions from Kremlin, more involvement into economy, and more attempts to get back all Soviet republics which existed within the Soviet Union. It is also important that the key part of this new vision and ideology is the approach according to which the first step which undermined the post-Second World War system was reunification of Germany. Because according to the vision of politicians from Kremlin, it was the first mistake of the West, and it was the first attempt to redraw borders. Can you imagine that reunification of Germany is being presented as the attempt to redraw borders? Something what is difficult to understand for us. So this is the situation. And what's going on in Ukraine? I ran out of time. I'm sorry, I'll try to be brief. But again, it's not a lecture. I just share with you my long reflections on the situation of my country and my people. Now, Ukraine at the stage of the final preparation for elections of the president of Ukraine. As you know, after the signing of the document on the 20th of February in Kiev, it was signed by Yanukovych, three leaders of opposition parties in Ukraine, and in the presence of three ministers of foreign affairs from Poland, Germany, and France. This document was about the future of Ukraine. And signing this document, President Yanukovych agreed on early presidential elections in Ukraine and change of the constitution of Ukraine. But the next day, President Yanukovych left the country. He left his people, he left his capital, and he escaped to the Russian Federation. So we found ourselves in a very unusual situation when President, who was supposed to continue to exercise his duties until new elections, escaped from the country. And the only legitimate body in Ukraine was at that time the parliament, the Verkhovna Rada. And this parliament voted in favor of elections of the new speaker. The speaker was elected. He is a representative of the party Batkivshchina, Motherland. This is the party of Yulia Tymoshenko, Mr. Turchina. And in the situation of the absence of the president, according to the constitution, Speaker Turchina was also by the parliament charged with the duties of acting presidents of Ukraine. The same parliament voted with a strong majority new government, and the Prime Minister of Ukraine is Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who represents a political force which was called Front of Changes, and which is now cooperating closely politically with the party of Yulia Tymoshenko. What this new government started to do and what are challenges? So first challenge was the aggression, because the next day when this government came to power or was appointed, we started to see the attack from the Russian Federation with all next steps, referendum, so-called referendum, and then annexation. Then we started to have more and more signals about provocations which have been prepared, as well as activization of pro-Russian groups and political circles, which resulted in unrest in eastern territories of Ukraine, namely in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. At the same time, previous government and President Yanukovych left Ukrainian economy in a very difficult and complicated situation. It became more and more clear with every day, and it is even more clear now, that under President Yanukovych was built strong, corrupted system with the aim to take whatever is possible from the budget, from Ukraine, from Ukrainian people. So the first thing new government had to do is to draft, to vote decisions which could prevent economic collapse in Ukraine, and they had to immediately restart negotiations with the International Monetary Fund and with the European Union. And it was successfully done. We have signed the political part of the association agreement with the European Union. We concluded agreements with the International Monetary Fund, with the European Union, with the World Bank, with the European Bank of Investment, EBRD, and the total portfolio of financial cooperation of Ukraine and international financial organization is now summed in like $18 billion for next 3 to 4 years. So this part of the problem is solved. What is not solved? That still we cannot re-establish peace and security within the country because of vulnerable situation in eastern parts of Ukraine and because of heavy involvement of the Russian Federation. As you probably know, the 17th of April in Geneva, Ukraine, Russia, EU, and United States elaborated a kind of declaration, a kind of political document, and we started to implement it. We arranged a national-wide dialogue, and 3 round tables took place already in Ukraine. Parliament of Ukraine adopted another resolution calling for settlement, peaceful settlement in Ukraine. More and more activities are being conducted in regions of Ukraine. New draft constitution is prepared already and submitted to the parliament, which in line with the expectation of the people, of Ukrainians, and which provides for more powers to regions, for decentralization of power, and for election of all local bodies. Because until now in Ukraine there is a system when governors are being appointed by the president. So we want to change it. We want the system of local administration fully based on elections. And people is ready to accept that. Why the government do these necessary steps in such a swift manner? Because Ukrainian people who came to Maidan, and let me remind you that first protests started when government, old Ukrainian government, decided to suspend signing of the agreement on free trade and association with the EU. It provoked immediately protests of young generation of Ukrainians who went on Maidan with one request: we want to be in Europe, get back on the European track. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Then, brutally, with overreaction of Minister of Interior, police forces, young students have been beaten, and Maidan was cleaned up from protesters, which immediately triggered more and more numerous serious protests in the population, and those protests led to the situation when Yanukovych had to resign and finally escaped from the country. People want changes. Ukrainians do not want corruption. Ukrainians do not want totalitarian system. Ukrainians do not want to be dependent on bureaucrats. They want to decide themselves on their future. And this future is absolutely clear. Majority of Ukrainian people, they support integrity and unity of Ukraine, no separatism. They continue to dream to live within one peaceful country. They want to have more powers in regions, and government and parliament ready to do so. And the next important step is elections of the president of Ukraine. Elections will take place this Sunday, 25th of May. We have 21 candidates who represent almost all political spectrum, from right to left, and these candidates represent different parts of Ukraine: east, south, west, central Ukraine. It is fair and open competition, and we expect that these elections will be the most transparent and free in all Ukrainian history. It is also remarkable that this campaign was cheaper for all candidates together than the campaign of previous President Yanukovych himself only. So even presidential campaign also shows us that vision and expectations of society is different. Ukrainians changed their mind. They know what they want, and they will vote for their president. Of course, the election of the president is not a magic button which would solve all problems, not at all. And we understand that, and you should also understand, that only one can win, only one can be elected, and it means all others will not be happy, as well as those parties who supported them as well as those people who voted for it. But it's democracy, and there is no other ways or mechanisms to elect. Only elected president can be president of the nation. And it is important also to understand that we live in Ukraine now with the constitution. Again, Parliament decided in accordance with the memorandum to get back the country to the constitution of 1996, which means that in Ukraine now we have parliamentarian presidential republic with the powers of president very limited. And it was one of the preconditions of negotiations during internal crisis in Ukraine. We have to limit powers of president. It was too much when one person decided all things. Now we are back. What does it mean for a newly elected president? That his powers and his possibilities also will be limited. I very frequently now have meetings with different auditoria and with media people, and many people are convinced that newly elected president will have a new government the next day. No, no. It's not his responsibility. It's the responsibility of the parliament. So most likely the next step is early elections to the parliament, because we have now on our political landscape many new faces and new political groups, political movements, which recommended themselves as reputable ones during Maidan events and who demonstrate more and more ability to govern in different regions. And the only way is to let them possibility to enter to the big politics. Let them to vote, to be voted and to be elected to the parliament. Let them rule the country. So it is most likely the next step with the new president will be elections to the parliament. What else? Maybe I will end with the fact that we invited as many observers as possible. And now, yesterday, a Central Electoral Committee published the latest information. 2,783 observers from 19 international organizations and more than 20 different countries. It's only international observers. Don't forget that all political parties in Ukraine are also has the right and actively use this right to observe elections. Plus media people who has free access to elections, and it's also a very powerful tool. And Ukrainians will vote also abroad, and the polling station is open in my embassy here in Brussels. We have more than 2,000 people registered on the list, and the activity is very high. We had many visitors recently who wanted to check their names in the electoral documents and who want to vote. People want changes. People want to vote. Unfortunately, it is not possible, according to the adopted law of Ukraine on the temporarily occupied territory, it is not possible to open polling stations on the territory of Crimea. So for those Crimeans who want to vote, such a possibility is open in the nearest polling stations by Ukrainian border. Of course, in some locations, like city of Slavyansk, in some districts of Lugansk and Donetsk, it wouldn't be possible to conduct elections in a regular way, because those armed people continue to occupy official buildings, continue to provoke civil population, and even more, they started to kidnap members of electoral commissions to make it impossible for the commission to work. There is another trick which was not expected maybe, but which is exercised now very intensively by the Communist Party. The Communist Party has had its candidate for the presidential elections, but several days ago he withdrew his candidature. He is not on the list anymore, but what he did next, he also withdrawn his people from the electoral commissions, representatives of the party. And it creates some problems to the normal activities of the commission, but it is settled. So there are no doubts that in most places the electoral process will be organized in a proper legal way with a huge presence of observers and the expectation that more than 70% of those who has the right to vote will participate in the presidential elections. I also, yesterday, 2 days ago, received a question about observers from Russia. We invited all, but official position of the Russian Federation was very clear. No official observers from Russia. And it's a pity, it's a sad fact. But again, my conclusion, maybe provocative, but the conclusion is that they mostly trained to conduct referenda and not elections. And we'll see how it will work. I'm full of optimism, and I believe that future of Ukrainian people is prosperous, and I believe that when president is elected, very soon we will sign a free trade association agreement with the European Union, and there is no other way for Ukraine than to move to the European Union. And this is the main fact which irritates Moscow, and that is why Moscow will continue whatever possible to make life of Ukraine and Ukrainians more difficult. They do not see the possibility of European future of Ukraine, and they do not see the possibility of membership of Ukraine in NATO, and I cannot understand why it should be decided in Moscow, but not in Ukraine, by Ukrainian people. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ambassador, will now give the floor to the other participants. First of all, to Madame Doyle, who will deliver the keynote speech. She represents the External Action Service, and then we will move on to Mr. Serge Trovans. Please, Madame Doyle.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to be here, and thank you to the Ambassador for a very interesting perspective also on the historical context of the situation that we now find ourselves in. I hope everyone can hear me. If they can't, I'll switch on the mic. Just to explain very briefly at the outset, I am actually only recently working with the EU External Action Service. I was previously working in the Irish Foreign Ministry, but I'm now based in the Europe and Central Asia Division, which is dealing inter alia with Russia, Eastern Partnership, and the Eastern Partnership countries, including Ukraine, and regional cooperation more generally. And my role is regional coordinator, which is a horizontal role. But what we are finding is that the events recently are impacting on all sorts of areas, not directly connected with the current crisis, because I think it is a crisis that we find ourselves in, which has serious implications, as the Ambassador has also said, not just for Ukraine, for Europe, but much broader implications potentially. So things have been moving at a very fast pace, and the European Union is finding it has to react constantly to new events on the ground. But I think we're now entering into a very crucial phase, and this weekend will obviously be extremely important in terms of the elections. Rather than give a speech, I think I'll just refer to some of the, well, really to the EU policy, which probably you're mostly familiar with, so I won't take too long on it, because I'm sure you probably like to ask some questions as well. I suppose that the crisis, as we know, really erupted last November, when, contrary to our hopes and expectations, the Ukrainian president decided not to proceed with signature of the association agreement, which we had been expecting at that time. What the EU has always tried to emphasise is that what we are offering something to the partnership countries. There is no pressure from us in this process for us, it is important to try and help the countries in our neighbourhood to move forward in their reform process. It's a mutual partnership. On the one hand, the EU offers support and reform, financial assistance, trade, people-to-people contacts, and in return, we hope that the countries themselves can implement the domestic reforms that will allow them to move forward. So obviously we were extremely disappointed with the decision in November, and subsequently we all witnessed the reaction of the Ukrainian people. Since then, unfortunately, events have obviously deteriorated, and the EU, I think, is trying continuously to demonstrate our ongoing support for the countries, and in particular at this moment for Ukraine. In the last 2 months, things have probably deteriorated again, also since the Geneva Agreement. The Geneva Agreement, from our point of view, we saw the government in Ukraine move almost immediately to implement it. They passed legislation in Parliament granting an amnesty law, which was a step in the right direction in terms of de-escalation, but unfortunately other parties to the agreement did not take the necessary steps, and now we find ourselves in a situation where the death toll is increasing. We had again, I think, at least 16 people reported killed yesterday. There have, however, been some positive signals recently. The ambassador referred to some of the reforms that the government is introducing and working on. We all obviously welcome the process of national dialogue. What's important is that going forward, this is a Ukraine-led process and that it is inclusive as possible. And I think the 3 rounds to date have been extremely important in this regard, because they obviously include also representatives from the regions, and we hope that the agreement and the memorandum that was passed by the Parliament last week will form the basis going forward of constitutional reform and also decentralisation. So some positive signals, I would say. In terms of EU support, as people may be aware, we moved on 21st of March to sign the political chapters of the association agreement, and we would hope that once a new and legitimate government is in place, that they will move quickly to sign the other parts of the agreement. But in the meantime, the EU has been moving ahead in terms of financial and economic support. We had a meeting on the 13th of May in Brussels between the Commission and the Ukrainian government, which was unprecedented to have a meeting in this format with an associated third country. At that meeting, a €1 billion macro-financial assistance programme was concluded, but this just forms part of an 11 billion support package over the next few years, which is designed again to stabilise the economic and financial situation in the country. A state-building contract worth 335 million in budget support was also agreed at those meetings. The EU is trying to demonstrate its support also in terms of high-level contacts and visits in both directions. We have Commissioner Bull has been on a number of occasions, most recently, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and President Van Rompuy was there on the 12th of May. Another important thing that the EU has found we have to increasingly focus on is public diplomacy, because I suppose we were proceeding all along on the basis that we were well-intentioned and that we were acting in good faith with the countries. But there's another narrative that has been put out there, and it is not based on fact. And we're now finding that we have to more and more concentrate on communicating what the Eastern Partnership is about, what the relationship is about, what is an offer to these countries, that it's a free choice for them. But this is very, very challenging, and again, it's an area that we need to work together with all 6 partner countries, but at the moment in particular with Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia, in trying to explain the benefits of these agreements over the longer term, because there may well be some shorter term costs involved. Other areas where the EU is trying to assist is in energy security. We know this is a huge problem for Ukraine currently in relationship with Russia. It's also potentially a big problem for Moldova. The Commissioner Oettinger has been involved in trilateral talks. He may well know more about this than me. But again, it's an effort to try and resolve this agreement, and also looking at alternative ways, including reverse flows from Slovakia. A further area where we are trying to assist is in security. The OSCE is currently leading in this area with a special monitoring mission, but the EU has provided substantial support to it. The EU is also supporting the electoral observation mission, which will have 1,000 monitors from the OSCE, which is obviously part of the larger international monitoring mission. And the next Foreign Affairs Council in June will consider whether or not the EU should launch a mission to support security sector reform in the country. A further important area is work on people-to-people contacts, because I think ultimately it's in the movement of people and relationships, whether it's business or tourism or students or study, that the general population in these countries see the benefits of closer association with the European Union. So Commissioner Malmström today announced that Ukraine would be able to move now to the second phase of their visa action plan, which is the implementation phase. And this again is another step along the road to visa-free travel in the future. And finally, I think I'll just refer very briefly to the elections, which the ambassador has also spoken about. It will be extremely important how things go on Sunday. I think indications to date are that preparations are proceeding very well. There will be a very high turnout. There may not be a definitive result this time around. It would probably be good if there were, because again that would introduce stability, some kind of stability towards the future. But if not, it would go to a second round. It's obviously there have been efforts to disrupt the process, particularly in some of the eastern regions. But certainly our analysis so far is that this would not affect the legitimacy overall in terms of the turnout and the results. But obviously we hope that anyone who wants to exercise their right to vote will be able to do so. I think I'll probably leave it there. I was just trying to give a flavour really of where the EU is coming from and the support we're trying to provide. I will be happy afterwards to try and answer one or two questions, but I'm not a Ukraine expert per se. So I'll probably conclude there. Thank you for your attention.
Well, I think I will conclude this series of speeches. Thank you very much for the first two ones. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased and honored to be able to talk to you tonight. And as said before, I'm working at the Royal Military Academy of Belgium in the Department of Conflict Studies, the chair of Geopolitics. And the approach that we have when we have a look at the conflicts and crises is to first have a look at history, which is also one of the chairs of the department, and have a look at the geography, another chair of the department, and then we try to put a little political sauce on it in our department or chair of world politics. So I suppose I will give you the academic approach to the theme of tonight, so I will provide you with no answers and only leave you with a lot of questions. So I suppose I will do. The hypothesis that I have or the initial question was for my intervention was to say the situation we are in now, which is, I think, a game of power, or just a struggle for power. Unfortunately, within your country, it's played by other actors within your country, sir. Is this the expected, or is this the unexpected? As a military in a planning phase, we always have a look at the opposing forces or the opponent's possible courses of action, and we try to always identify two to be able to work in our own courses of action against those two. And it's always the most likely or the most dangerous. So the question that I have is really for tonight is this the expected one, the most likely, or is this the unexpected one, the most dangerous? Or maybe a third option, the most likely is also the most dangerous scenario. So I will go quite quickly over two tweets that I received today, and that are really related to the situation because we are in a current crisis. The first tweet is from a Russian official. It's the first Vice Prime Minister of Russia, Ihor Shuvalov, who is asking the question, why are the USA against post-Soviet integration? And the second one is a tweet by Phil Breedlove, who is the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe, so the Allied Command Operations. And he said that verified and complete withdrawal of Russian troops from the Ukraine border will do much to de-escalate the situation, but will not erase the recent events or slow NATO's adaptation to the new security environment in Europe. So I think we are facing a new security environment in Europe, or at least a new paradigm of security in Europe. So first, to go over the history of both countries, one could say that Russia and Ukraine has always been seen in one picture. There has always been influences from what I would call a permanent, at least regional power within the region, which was Russia, and an influence on his neighbor, who was Ukraine, who has been Ukraine with Ukraine. Ukraine has always been an important economic partner for Russia, and nonetheless in the energy and the agricultural domain. I recall times in which it was said that Ukraine was the wheat reserve of Russia. During centuries, and this is from the time of the Russian Empire, of the Tsars, during and after the Communist Revolution, and also during the Cold War, it has always been at the heart of Russian foreign policy to try to have a buffer zone around the borders of Russia. This from west to east, all over the borders. So Russia is an enormous country. So at the peak of the development of what I would call the Russian Empire, which was the USSR, the USSR was just covering more than 11 time zones and was representing 1/6 of the emerged land on Earth. So this was really a big player, nothing less than a global major player in the bipolar world. This all changed, as you have said, sir, one day in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell and the Cold War ended. Although history will recall this event as a win-win solution for both big players of that time, one could say that only the western part remained as it was and just continued to grow, and at the eastern part we saw just the collapse of this USSR, but not just a collapse of the country as such, or the organization as such, but also an economic collapse, a geographical collapse, or disintegration, and an ideological collapse. And this was then the beginning of what has been known until a couple of months ago, the unipolar world under the hegemonic umbrella of the United States, what I would call the hegemon of the Western modern world. So this was a new world for the Russian intelligentsia and for the successive Russian governments. And you have said that Vladimir Putin came to power in 2000, and it took more than 8 years, I would say it took him 14 years, to become powerful enough to create new problems to the security of Europe, or at least the security of the region. So I think I would like to say that the lethargy of the Russian politics lasted for what I would call the Russian bear hibernation, lasted for almost 20 years or more. And what I'm trying to explain to you, going over this history of Russia, and maybe more in particular the history after the end of the Cold War, is that within Russia, and I'm not trying to be provocative and not trying to be the devil's advocate tonight, but within Russia, one could say that there was a sense of frustration of, in their eyes, having lost the Cold War. So this is the situation they are in now, still now, that's what I suppose. We are still dealing at the head of the Russian state with former USSR, KGB, FSB products. So maybe they are also romantics, thinking about these old glorious times of before 1990, before 1989. And I think they are now more assertive in their foreign policy, and they really want to regain a predominant role on the international scene. So I'm really asking myself the question if the remark of President Obama during his speech a couple of months ago here in Brussels at the Beaux-Arts, when he called Russia a regional power, has been well accepted in Moscow. I don't think this is the current objectives for the foreign policy of Russia. And as you know, and it has been said tonight, Ukraine, for its part, also encountered after the fall of the the Berlin Wall. As a very young democracy, some difficulties, some recurrent political revolutions took place, and one of these revolutions we saw a couple of months ago being also at the start of the current situation. So I would like to go quite quickly over the geography. As I said, it's an enormous country, and the buffer zone, I would like to go over the zones within or the parts of the buffer zone around Russia. Nowadays we can even start from the Arctic with some tensions and crises over there, so no crisis but still tensions in the Arctic. Go down on the western side of Russia, and then we will come to your region, sir, which encompasses both Belarus and Ukraine. Then we can go further to more central and eastern European parts, and all the frozen conflicts that we know in the Caucasus. It has been stated also. So we have Georgia in 2008, we still have Moldova in this region, and please, we should not forget that the Russian troops were in Pristina one day before the NATO troops in '99, just telling us that they were also dealing with the situation. And finally, I will have maybe a third or fourth part of this buffer zone, and this would be the Central Asian group of countries. For the past 2 decades, you spoke about the CIS, and Moscow has sought to embed those states within a system that we could call Russia-controlled, or Russia-controlled institution. We have the CIS, we have also the Collective Security Treaty Organization, a Mutual Defense Alliance, as what they call like Russian NATO, Asian NATO. We also had the Eurasian Economic Community, EURASEC, which is a customs union, and so the CIS. And this is all a loose federation of former Soviet countries, not very successful, so another source of frustration, another part of this rim, of this buffer zone around Russia. And then of course we have what we could call the Asian or the Eastern Asian part of this buffer zone, and this is the relations between Russia and another big player, another emerging player, which is China. And we saw one big gas deal settled this week for a couple of billions or trillions of dollars. So the energy, or at least the resources, they cannot sell anymore on the western part of the country. They will make sure that they are able to sell them on the eastern part of the country and get a good deal for it. So what is of much importance is in fact the interconnection between all these zones. And I think it would be foolish to think that Russia would not have reacted when, in this kind of the same way, as you said, also they reacted also in 2008 in Georgia, or in other conflicts, when Ukraine was really trying to escape from the influence of the Russian Federation. And this for a very clear reason. This is the interconnection between all these parts of the buffer zone. Because if, and this is a game of power, this is a game of deterrence, if Ukraine would have just have signed the agreement and would have come, I would say, under the umbrella of the European Union, or at least be a privileged partner of the European Union, what would have happened in the Caucasus? I don't think the conflicts over there would have been frozen much longer, and what would have happened in the Central Asian region. I think the tensions and crisis over there would also have risen in the last weeks or months, or at least this year or coming year. So all these parts of the buffer zone that the Russian Federation like to have around this big territory are really interlinked, and if you want to lose one, you will lose the other ones also. And if you maintain one or keep one under your umbrella automatically, through this game of power, this deterrence, you will keep the other ones also. I made a special point here on my notes about the strategic importance of Crimea. I will not go into the protection of Russian-speaking population in this region. I would just like to say that Russia always tries to have access to warm seas, and this is one point of access to those different straits, up to the Bosphorus, to go to the Mediterranean Sea and the other oceans. So, of course, this is of such a strategic importance to Russia that they will never lose the opportunity to maintain a fleet in this region. So politics, almost my last point. So let's say the situation, we have a regional play now with global aspirations. I think still frustrating from the aftermath of the Cold War that wants to reaffirm its economic, diplomatic and political strengths. So the beer during the hibernation got new teeth, I suppose. And we also face a geographical situation that connects all those parts of the buffer zone. On the other side, we have Europe or the EU that is confronted with an identity question about what is the future of the EU. We also see that in the response of the EU in regard of what is happening in Ukraine, we have some discussions, diverging ways of trying to respond. Of course, we have the sanctions, but at the same time, when one has to choose between continue to sell some military equipment to Russia or try to align to this to the European line of sanctions, it's still difficult to choose the right side. And I think that we are also now in a situation in which Europe has to take care of its own security and its own borders, the eastern border and the southern border. And one could say that these were two tests of the last years, and I would tend to say that we kind of failed in those two tests, because we still have an important migration problem that is not really taken care of, and it's taken into account, not really taking care of the southern border. So we kind of fail on this side, and we also kind of fail with the soft power response that we would like to implement in the Ukrainian crisis regarding Russia, because to be effective, soft power needs to have at least a small part of hard power, and to be effective. So the question is still on. Was this the planning? So was it the EU that tried to scratch the border, that wanted to see how far they could go in their relations with Russia in this game of power? Or is it really Russia that tries to see how far they could go with us, or at least with our major ally, the USA? For me, the question is still open. Does Russia also use this window of opportunity just after what is called the Asia pivot of the USA, and we are now like on our own, on our own continent? Are we able to take care of all security? This is another open question I leave to you and to your analysis. And I think I will conclude here. I had other things I'd like to talk to you about: Clausewitz, Fukuyama, Huntington. Of course, it was think about Huntington, the clash of civilizations, the entities, the language, religion. I could only say, this is also in his book, that Ukraine is a special country because the fault line between civilizations is really going through your country, and you're not at the border of your country. So it was, in fact, that was foreseeable, that if those two civilizations would clash, it would be in Ukraine, or at least in this region. So regarding the NATO's approach, so I already mentioned the tweet from Saker. No soft power in NATO. We will call it smart power. So this means hard power with the means that are still left within the organization to try to do some hard power. I think there the response, because NATO is a really security organization, security provider, is more effective. And we saw deployments of troops for exercises along the borders of the Baltic states, also in Poland. Of course, there the allies try to reconfirm the Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which is in fact the article dealing with collective defense. And just to come back a last time on history, after the fall of the war, we saw that all the satellites that were not of the importance of your countries migrated to the West, migrated first to NATO, to get under this umbrella of collective security, before trying to improve their social, economical, and status by joining the EU. So it was really first a rush for security, and then afterwards, in the second phase, try to improve the own position. So, and of course, NATO is still a little bit more deterrent than the EU, because it's a security provider, and a shown security provider, and there is still like something like a nuclear power within the NATO, although Belgians do not want to speak about it because there are no nuclear weapons in Belgium. And we still have this major ally, which are the United States of America. So after the analysis done in the department, I think we still, as I mentioned during my introduction, we still remain with a lot of questions, and maybe during the debate or trying to answer your questions, we could be more closer to the answers than the questions that I leave with you. So thank you very much.
to a brief discussion, so if you want to make a comment or to ask a question, please raise your hand, but don't speak inside the microphone, otherwise we cannot record.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellencies, the Embassy of the Russian Federation. If you're curious to hear the voice of Russia, of course, at Moscow. So, I will not discuss the introduction of this evening because you know the position of my country is different, and to explain it, I need a speech as long as were the speeches of representatives of Ukraine, the European Union, and the military school of Belgium. I'd like just to underline that it was many lies in this intervention, and I was surprised by the speech of Mr. Dolhov, because it's difficult not to know all these realities for you, and I don't know how to manage to interpret them in this way. So my question is, you criticized a lot Mr. Yanukovych, the former president of Ukraine, but you were the ambassador of Yanukovych regime in Belgium, and now you're representing a new regime. So my question is, what are common points between Yanukovych regime and new regime in Kiev that allow you to discern with brilliance these two regimes being a little bit different? The second question is to Madame Dell, if am I allowed to put it. What is the reaction of the European Union to the tragedy in Odessa, where many civilians were burned alive by Nazi band support by Kiev? What is the reaction, official reaction? And the third remarks to Mr. Strobans, excuse me. So apparently you are a military man. You mentioned the phrase of Mr. Obama said here in Brussels concerning the point of view that Russia is a regional power. So, do you agree with Mr. Obama, taking into consideration that Russia remains only one country in the world, still able to take the United States from the global card? Thank you.
So if you agree, I would like to answer first, and maybe I will answer two questions in a row, maybe not to start a discussion of deaf people. So. What I would like to answer, and maybe is to answer, I would like to answer in place of the ambassador. What I could say from my experience and from my knowledge is that the diplomatic corps of the diplomatic corps or something else, diplomatic corps of a country is not really related to a regime. It's like, especially in Belgium, and I speak for Belgium then, they tend to be apolitical and just represent their country, not the regime within the country. So for myself, I don't have any problem with the ambassador staying in place when the regime changes. Otherwise, I think there are a lot of countries when you have to move the ambassador a lot of time. This is one part. And I think they want to stay apolitical, so not to be really linked to a regime, but linked to a country. And I think this is also the strength of a diplomatic element or diplomatic corps. This is the first part. The second part, and this was in fact, I was, when I stated Mr. Obama, I was asking myself the question if this was really smart, and I'm supportive, so yes, it was smart, I need to say, to just mention Russia as a regional power. And as I know that those speeches are well prepared, also the choice of the words were also well prepared and well chosen. What I could say from what I study in the academy and also the exercise, or at least the exchanges that I have at the academy with my students and other professors and lecturers, is that we are now evolving from this unipolar world after the end of the Cold War, and this hegemon being the USA or the Western world or Western civilization, depending on the on the author that you want to note. We are evolving to what I would call a multipolar world, but still with an hegemony. So we are evolving to really a new era, a new paradigm. We will still have the hegemony, but we will have like what the military term would say, the lieutenants. And these are the BRICS. So Russia, China, India, Brazil, and us. They needed somebody from Africa, I will also say South Africa. So this, I don't think they will be able to just, they will maybe destabilize, but they will not replace the hegemon USA. But they will play a more important role on the international scene. And I think it's for sure, and that is what we see is happening now. And maybe I have no time to go to the last part of what I would like to say, but we also, when we speak about conflicts or wars, most of you and myself also, we think about main battle tanks and a lot of bloodshed and a lot of casualties. But you can, and I will state Clausewitz because I did the General Staff course in Germany, so I have to state Clausewitz every time I speak or every time I have a speech. He says that war is a continuation of politics. I would say that after the Cold War, politics and economics were the continuation of war. And this is really a triangle that you have over there. And are we at war with China? I think the audience would say no. Almost 10% with the audience would say no. I would say yes. We are in an economical war with China. When I say that the EU soft power is not working, it's not true. Because we still have the hard power, but the hard power is not military, it's economic, or it's just institutional. So you really have to make a difference there between the economics part, the politics part, and the crisis or conflict or war part. And this is really a triangle in continuation, or I would say Clausewitz in reverse. But these are, I think, the elements. So still one big players, but a lot of regional or supra-regional players. That would please you, I suppose, as an answer. Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. And for me, it's just another proof that Russia do not miss any opportunity to stress its isolation, unfortunately, everywhere. United Nations, OSCE, EU, NATO, any other forum. And this is just another proof. What the question was about Yanukovych. He, as 4 other presidents until Yanukovych of Ukraine, was elected by Ukrainian people. He was elected publicly, as well as the next president will be elected during the all national-wide elections. I was ambassador 3 times. This is my third country. So, first position was to Turkey, and I was appointed to Turkey by, at that time, President Kuchma. My second place was Berlin, and it was President Yushchenko who appointed me to Berlin. Now I'm in Brussels, and I was appointed, you are absolutely right, by President Yanukovych. But don't forget what all civil servants, at least in Ukraine, and what all diplomats do when they enter to the civil service. They sign a declaration that they will serve Ukrainian people, full stop. Not presidents, not government, but people. And for me there is no ambiguity or whatever, however you could analyze the situation or interpret it. I just do my job. Like army must always serve people. Diplomacy must always serve people, and I will do so. What is in common and what is the difference between Yanukovych and next president? I told you that common is that they will be, the next also will be elected. What is the common between Yanukovych and the current government? The current government is legitimately voted in the Ukrainian parliament, and that is it. What is, again, don't forget in your questions, you not remarks, that it's up to Ukrainian people and Ukrainian parliament to elect presidents, to appoint governments, and we really need no any advices from Moscow or from Washington or from Brussels. It's our business. And it's up to us to criticize this minister or that minister. Up to you to deal with this government, because we are neighbors and we are always in good relations with Russian people, not leaders, but people. It is a friendly people. And by the way, I don't know if this fact is publicly known in this auditorium, but I'm Russian by nationality. I'm Russian. My parents Russian. I was born in Ukraine. Yes, I'm a citizen of Ukraine, but I speak Ukrainian in my family. And by the way, I need no any protection. So thank you for.
Ukrainian, so there is no two different peoples.
There are two different people. This is not the case. And what was again? I have to come back to this definition of Pax Russica. This is a good example. One people, all of them, Belarusians, Ukrainians, one people.
You are Russian.
You consider the situation like that. For us,
You said you are Russian.
I'm Russian.
Yeah.
I'm Ukrainian citizen. Don't forget that. Don't play games, because on your territory there are so many different nationalities. Chechen, Tatar. Wait next 10 years, you will see how many Chinese will live and work in Siberia. If one day they would like to announce referendum, you will then think that you open Pandora box. Thank you.
Very briefly, I think the question was specifically in relation to Odessa. I mean, the EU has, I think, continuously expressed its regret and sadness at loss of life, regardless of where that was. It doesn't differentiate between which side people might support or not. So obviously that is the case for Odessa also. My understanding is that there was an investigation ongoing on that. I don't know if there have been an outcome, but obviously that is something that we would also pay attention to. I think there's a question down.
So, one more question?
Thank you very much for the elusive talk. My question will surely be directed to Your Excellency Ambassador. As an external observer, we all know that Ukraine depends a lot from Russia on energy, the gas supply. Now, looking towards the EU, what alternative is there that Ukraine will be provided to probably sway away from this stronghold that Russia is using because of the dependence on energy? The second question will also concerns looking at Ukraine and Russia as master and servant. Master and servant, in the light of, I'm from Africa, of course, in the light of looking at colonial masters. And so I want to learn some lessons from there. If the Western world can also exercise this approach where dependence on our colonial masters, we can really be on our own, elect our own government, and be by ourselves. What lessons can we learn from this? Thank you.
Thank you. Energy security. Yes, it's an important issue. And for Ukraine, it was not easy to build relations in this particular sphere with the Russian Federation. We remember and we experienced together with Europe and especially several EU member countries, 2 gas wars, which resulted, conflict has been settled. As a price was different, and for Ukraine, the result of the last gas war was very high. It was so high that it brought the country into not only energy dependence, but also financial dependence on Russia and Gazprom. How to solve the issue? Of course, we need to negotiate, and the next round will take place this Monday, if I'm not wrong, with EU and Russian Federation. What is the subject of negotiations? For Ukraine, top priority is the price for gas, because the price which existed before the year 2014, we cannot accept as a fair one, and we will continue to negotiate with Gazprom. If not, we are ready to go to Stockholm Court arbitration to discuss prices, because we are not unique. Russia has many customers of gas, and there are examples when price have been reconsidered and decreased in different cases. But there is also one very important thing. Ukraine is not only a transit country. Ukraine is a big client, consumer too. We buy from Russia up to 30 billion cubic meters of gas per year. So business is business. And if you ask Gazprom, they also need to sell their gas. Gas is a very specific commodity. You cannot store it unless you have underground storages like we do, we have, and capacity is like 30 billion cubic meters. You cannot or pump gas or burn it. No other way. It's a very specific product. And that is why the agreement with China, long-term agreement, will require, first of all, additional investment to build pipeline. And it will take several years. And look at the situation. What was the price of this wars for Russia and Europe? Northern Stream was built. What was the price? I don't remember, maybe. But it's quite impressive figures. Southern Stream is being projected, drafted, feasibility study has been done. EU was not happy because it's against several EU decisions, but I'm sure that Gazprom will continue to invest in this pipeline. Why? To escape from the territory of Ukraine. But if you look at the capacity of Ukrainian gas system, we can provide facilities to pump every year more than 120 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Europe. And this capacity can be even increased with replacement of some compressing stations up to 150 billion cubic meters. What is the capacity of the Nord Stream? Somebody knows it. If I'm not wrong, from 15 to 17 million cubic meters. Roughly 8 times less than Ukraine can pump. So the third thing is that we started to work together with international companies to search for shale gas reserves. And these works have been already started. So there is a possibility to increase, according to some evaluation, in 10 years' time from now, Ukraine could become even exporter of gas. Don't forget that we also extract our own gas. Unfortunately, for a certain period of time, we lost our capacity to continue exploitation of gas fields on the Black Sea near Crimea. That's occupied. And by the way, several platforms, drilling platforms for gas from the Black Sea have been unfortunately captured by Russia, together with all works have been done. Of course, we will continue also to look at the Black Sea, shale gas, near Odessa. Odessa Oblast or Kherson Oblast. Plus, Ukraine will be ready to switch to liquid gas and to bring it by shipping ways. So it's very bad to be dependent. And we know our experience teaches us that one has to look for other solutions. And unfortunately, we were not able to solve this problem. Why? Because the friendship with Moscow was very close, so close that no one president was ready to make brave step to start to solve this problem. And that is why we didn't build the capacity to replace gas import from Russia. But don't forget also that at the same time Ukraine generates more than 40% of its electrical energy on nuclear power plants. We have 15, and we continue to extend our nuclear program, and it's also a solution.
I will now give the floor for the last question to the ambassador of Kazakhstan. I think he would like to ask a question.
Question?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have a question. Professor, I know much more than you are discussing here. For that reason, I don't have any question. I can make a comment.
Let's respect the time.
I can address to the students.
Please, Mr. Ambassador, the microphone.
I would like to address to the students and to make an advice to the students. You are graduates, right? Today you have diplomas. It is of course very interesting to be at the conferences like we have today, to listen to the speakers. But for you, for future diplomats, it is very important to use all sources involved to this or that event that you are discussing, to analyze all sources of information and then to make your assessment. For you, for your profession in future, that will be important. This is my comment. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have to thank you for the trouble that you took to come and to make the speeches. Many thanks, Mr. Ambassador. Many thanks to you, Madam Doyle, and of course to you, Major Stroman. Now we move on to the second part of the celebration.